investment. I'm expecting Copilot to have an impact on my sales function. And I'm leaning on my sales ops folks to define those KPIs that may be most relevant, like size of deals won, percent win rate, things of that nature. Tying the data together, we can really quickly illuminate this is the impact.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tarek, and today we're getting granular. We're exploring how to use behavioral data to tie enterprise AI impact with business outcomes. My guest is Bob Steadman, a director of AI workforce transformation at Microsoft, and Bob has an incredible background, including over 7 years at Microsoft, helping enterprises navigate cloud and workforce changes. So, Bob, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Tarek. Really looking forward to today's session.
Yeah, so let's start with the fundamental question. Can you walk us through your journey of measuring behavioral data in the workplace and why is it important in today's world?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, I've been with Microsoft for 7 years and actually joined to work with the solution, a very unique solution that allows us and other organizations to have a much better sense of how organizational changes and technology transformations are actually impacting underlying behaviors. And us being Microsoft, we actually have one of the most unique data sets to help look at that. So many users in the workplace are leveraging like Outlook for email and calendar, Teams for chat and calls, now Copilot for transformational actions. All of that rich data for customers lives in their cloud environment and is something that they have access to. And we have a unique set of tools that make it easy for them to access and look at that process data and make sense of it. And so when I was brought on 7 years ago, well before the advent of Copilot and generative AI, the idea was let's leverage that data set to really help firms better understand what things look like around productivity, engagement, well-being, as well as business outcomes, right? What are the behaviors of my top performers? How's that leading to the sorts of outcomes that we're looking to have? Microsoft actually acquired that technology when Satya took over 10 years ago because he was so focused on landing his cultural transformation. But in order to do that, right, we need to understand our behaviors actually changing along with those different mandates. So here we are 7 years later, and what started out as an amazing solution to help firms really understand productivity, something that saw a huge inflection point right around the time of COVID and not long after, right? That sudden shift to remote, so disruptive to organizations and their employees. What's that impact on our employees? And I think that really helped a lot of firms better understand the usefulness of this kind of data set and solution. And now here we are with Copilot being front and center for Microsoft as a company. The platform that I've been talking about in the data set, that's actually the system that we're using and we're helping customers leverage to really understand what is that business impact and organizational impact of Copilot on their employees.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to the strategy now, where through your lens, how do you define success for an enterprise AI initiative? And how do you translate that into measurable KPIs that businesses care about?
Sure. So I think working with this solution actually has been a great grounding for me as I talk to customers about the work that they're doing with Copilot and generative AI. I think any initiative that you're launching to transform a company, whether it's process focused, it's culturally focused, it's technology focused, really has to start with some key principles and ideas around what are the expected outcomes that we're looking to drive, which really have to be measurable, right? Even if we're thinking about cultural, we need to understand like what's that output going to look like. We may be wrong with those assumptions, right? But if we don't start out with assumptions and we don't have data to ground it in, we're flying blind. And so I think particularly with Copilot, which is so new for so many organizations, it's really a great time to sit back and say, look, as we start to roll this out, my personal preference, rather than going broad, focusing on certain segments, lines of business, offices, regional areas, starting with something that is going to be inherently more measurable, right? And with that, suspicion, if I roll this out for sales, right? My expectation likely is I would expect the sellers leveraging Copilot or generative AI to see an uptick in pipeline, in deals closed, in win rate. things of that nature, right? And I can go on, and we have great libraries with different scenarios and KPIs and metrics that customers can turn to. And we have teams that will focus exclusively with them on that. But I think it's like really being sharp about picking an area that you think Copilot, generative AI can really move the needle on, having that supposition, deploying it, and then using a solution of the data set, like I'm talking about around the behavioral piece, to start tracking, is it driving underlying behaviors we might expect? But even more importantly, by pulling in business data, perhaps from a CRM, sales operations system, are we seeing those top performing teams have better results when we look at those measurable KPIs? If we are, that's great, because now, again, leveraging that behavioral data set, we can start to put together a change plan around what are the behaviors that lead to success for teams that aren't leveraging the solutions in the same way. Let's start rolling that out, right, as the gold standard for the ways in which we want them to operate, and then measure, is it having the desired impact or not? Right? We always have to measure, and our assumptions likely will be quite often wrong, but the data helps expose in a wonderful way, like, okay, that's wrong. Like, what else may be going on? And it just opens the door, I think, in a really fruitful way to help businesses not just drive change, but do it in a meaningful fashion and a measurable fashion.
Yeah. Well, building on that definition of success, how should organizations balance leading indicators like usage and engagement versus lagging indicators like cost savings, revenue uplift for AI programs?
Great question. I think it's a little bit of a mix of both. Like if we look at Microsoft's journey, and we're very public about some of the measurements we share, usage on its own really isn't enough, right? Looking to see, is someone using it every day? We actually do some things where we are tracking internally the number of times that people are using it on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And we found some interesting results for our employees in our situation, that there is sort of a demarcation line, right? Once people get above a certain number of actions with some level of frequency, daily, weekly, monthly basis, Copilot takes hold, right? It becomes embedded into their way of working, right? Anything below that, they're more of a sporadic user. So there is some element of really pushing users to get above that waterline, right? To start making sure that AI is becoming embedded into the work they do, their processes. And at that point, we really start to see the quality of work for so many people take off. So I want to just call that out. Like, I think there is an element where, because this is so different from the ways in which people have been working for centuries, like there has to be some intentionality around trying to, create and incent users to act and react in new and different ways that on their own they likely wouldn't. That said, I think beyond that, right, those, at the end of the day, if we are, we're looking at the data, we're seeing good usage over time, we're seeing things become embedded for employees, and we take that as a given. At the end of the day, once that's stable, we have to look at those leading indicators, right? Because that's really what's going to tell companies how beneficial this is, help them better understand how to invest, where to invest, right? Likely not all, even if I may be using generative AI across the firm, there's some areas where it's going to be much more beneficial, either driving revenue, reducing costs than others. So again, I want to be smart, not just going wall to wall, but pinpointing, kind of those areas where I think I'm going to see the greatest return. And by focusing on the KPIs and tracking the data, I think that really helps me get there.
Well, moving on to common challenges, what's the biggest measurement mistake organizations make when they try to prove AI's value?
Another excellent question. So to me, I think like the space itself has been evolving very, very quickly. And when Copilot first came out almost 2 years ago now, the focus was really around, kind of what we think of as more personal productivity, right? I'm a user and I'm trying to leverage this to get through my day in a quicker fashion. And I think, firms are wildly different places when we look at the maturity curve in terms of their adoption of AI for many reasons, right? I think for good reasons, some firms have held back as they think through security, risk, other kinds of issues. But that said, I think, to me, really thinking about the personal productivity elements of Copilot is almost table stakes now, right? That's something firms can get whichever provider they're going to. And every company that's in the space should be able to provide their users value at that level. So to me, I think the biggest mistake is maybe focusing a little too much on that space, right?
Mhm.
To me, I think the biggest opportunity for firms is going to lie around leveraging Copilot for business functions. Now, whether that's to help users in that space through chat solving problems, or I think more and more we're going to start to see agents begin to proliferate to automate processes and take care of different functions. So I think that to me is, I see a lot of firms who are kind of caught doing these bake-offs or comparisons around the personal productivity piece, and very important. But I think, again, table stakes. I think the real value is going to come by focusing on functions, issues, processes that AI can really automate or streamline.
Yeah. Well, thinking past those productivity metrics and looking ahead to starting a type of POC or pilot, what baseline metrics should every team really capture before starting an AI?
Great question. So I think to me, a lot of it just comes down to having your arms around the data that ties into that function or business process, right? Having a sense already of, kind of what good or the norm is, right? As well as having that for some period of time, right? I don't want just a snapshot, a given moment. I want a longer look back to better understand, okay, like if I'm thinking of case resolution, how many cases on average are people processing a day? If I'm thinking about, kind of a marketing project, what is that window from start to finish and the elements that make that up? If I'm thinking about manufacturing something, how long are the different pieces that go into that particular process? Same thing with design. And so I think having a really good grounding in the data itself, like this is where things are. And I think it's also leaning into the business partners that are tied to those functions, because they're going to have that understanding of, okay, like, yes, things are working, but if we could fix this bottleneck, this issue, this process, that's when things are going to take off. So I think having a good alignment between the IT team and transformational teams that are running the project, but the business folks who understand where those processes are getting stuck, by pulling that together, right? Understanding of where the low hanging fruit is, as well as what the data looks like. So now as we go to implement change, we can immediately see what that benefit is, right? Are we getting the return that we would expect out of that? And again, if we're not, that can help firms recalibrate. Okay, maybe the investment's worth it, but not to a certain level, not to a certain amount. Or, wow, this is really exceeded. And this is, I think, where I'm seeing a lot more companies. This is really exceeding anything I could have imagined. How do I start going bigger in that function and deploying more broadly across the organization?
Well, on that note, let's like pivot to the executive view. And I'm wondering from your viewpoint is how do you connect user behavior to business outcomes in a way leaders understand?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a great question. And we actually, one of the coolest things to me, so again, based on my own personal background, looking at the behavioral data set, we have, and have been working on for a while, some interesting telemetry and reporting that will tie those Copilot actions and behavioral data with customer feedback around desired or expected business outcomes and some business data to light up that particular view, right? So as a leader, I made the investment. I'm expecting Copilot to have an impact on my sales function. And I'm leaning on my sales ops folks to define those KPIs that may be most relevant. Like size of deals won, percent win rate, things of that nature. Tying the data together, we can really quickly illuminate this is the impact, right? And what's exciting to me, it's not just understanding what that impact is for, kind of my highest performing users. It's also helping to illustrate, okay, if we can then use them as the gold standard and drive broader change across that function to bring everyone else to where they are, now all of a sudden this is the potential revenue impact I may see for that sales use case, right? If I can move people across tiers, I can expect this much more in terms of wins, this much more in terms of deal size increase, things of that nature. So that's just kind of one look at it. But we have, teams of folks who are thinking about this from a business value perspective, looking at bringing in other kinds of data sets, right? because I'm just talking about the behavioral one. If you think about the ability to really, really get into that business data and look at a process end to end and start to understand where Copilot is having an impact on that from a system level beyond the people piece, that to me is really transformative.
Yeah, well, expanding on that, when we actually think about visualizing the data, what does an executive ready enterprise AI KPI dashboard look like? And what belongs on that page one?
Yeah. So like I said, I think to me, we have our own tooling to kind of help with pieces of that. Again, tying together some of the Copilot pieces, the behavioral pieces. I think for a lot of executives who are looking to better understand how Copilot is transforming their organization at a behavioral level and a business level, it's an excellent start. And the solution itself, very robust. It's available for all of our customers. We have teams of people that will help them with that. It will launch out into common reporting and analytics platforms like Power BI or Tableau. To me, that's a great starting point. And again, too many firms are kind of flying blind without having that level of visibility around adoption, impact, and how it all relates and ties into the business pieces. Beyond that, though, it's good to keep in mind many of our firms that we're working with have rich benches of people scientists, of data analytics folks, data scientists who are doing their own work, whether that's in Fabric, it's in Snowflake, bringing together data from a lot of different systems to visualize that and help them see what that looks like. And we may not be the only source of data with regards to those kinds of systems, which is fine. It makes sense, right? Companies are doing a lot with a lot of different vendors. They have a lot of different systems, but I think there's a lot that we have to offer those analytics teams in terms of helping them pull in that data, leverage the data that they're getting from our tools, and help them better understand how to make sense of that. And so more and more, I'm leaning into and having a good time partnering with customers about, again, how they start to make sense of all of this rich data that they have from Microsoft and other solutions that are out there.
Yeah. Well, moving beyond the presentation and some of the roles that you mentioned here too, who in your view needs to own measurement across the business and how do you get that alignment?
That is a great question, Tarek. In my mind, right? And again, a lot of this is in flux. Companies are trying a lot of different things in this space. So I'm not advocating for the creation of new roles. I think there are likely different functions that can own this, whether that's a chief transformation officer. It could live in IT. It could live with the analytics teams. But I think to me, really what this new moment, this inflection point that we're at really requires is this idea of the creation of kind of a generative AI center of excellence, right? Which likely will be needs to pull people from many different functions, right? We need IT stakeholders. We need folks from our HR or talent teams. We need people from operations. It needs to be cross-functional. Do you need kind of a center? And I think for every company, they're going to figure out who the person is to best lead that, right? Based upon their skill set, their passion, their relationships within the organization. It needs to be someone who's very fluent at kind of bringing people together, navigating these divides and driving business outcomes that their very nature are going to be cross-functional. And we're seeing, I think a lot of our top partners, the big four and others, are doing really great work with customers, helping them think through what that's going to look like for them. Right. But I think this moment does require call out that firms need to be thinking about generative AI more holistically in a way that's looking at the entire company. And they need someone driving that, right? Who's not tied too much to a particular function, right? If they are, I can have someone from IT leading it or HR, whatever, but they need to be able to pull in to these different functions and groups. Otherwise, they're going to miss the mark.
Well, moving into the technical validation, what are the most effective analytical techniques, whether it's A/B testing, causal inference models, enterprise can use to confidently prove that the observed behavioral change was directly tied or caused by the enterprise AI technology?
Yeah, I have always been a huge believer in A/B testing. And that's something Microsoft has been a huge supporter of. Like that's something that we do a ton of. And again, if I've got the data, right? If I have the data, then I can really start to tease out what's happening between those two different groups, right? Like one with Copilot, one without, or I've got two different groups using it, but one's struggling. And I need to pull in all kinds of different data sets, right? I need to pull in the performance data, system data to understand which groups really are doing well. But it's by taking that kind of approach that I can start to tease out, all right, with what's really happening here, and I can start to experiment, because I think experimentation is that other big piece to it. We're at a moment where firms really need to test out this, right? I think we're all doing that when it comes to generative AI and Copilot. Like, what works, what doesn't work. We're learning, right? Am I going to have more meetings, less meetings? I don't know. And then there's this piece of like, it's going to be different for every company and every function in every company, right? And so the only, like, yes, I can pull some things out of the general research and benchmarking and trends, but at the end of the day, like every company operates a little bit differently. The culture is a little different. Their relationships with customers and risk and other sorts of things different. And so they're going to need to really lean in to testing, experimenting, trying new things, figuring out what works, being willing to fail fast. And based on that, start to move, refine the model, push out, keep testing because market conditions are changing, right? Where we're at in year 1, 2 of our Copilot journey, it's going to be very different in year 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So we have to have that commitment to constantly test, evaluate, check, try, like as market conditions change, all of that. And it's an exciting journey, and it's impossible without data, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, on that note, and really to enable that type of analysis, what core technology and data infrastructure components are essential for accurately collecting, linking, and processing the real-time behavioral data necessary for that type of measurement?
Yeah, I mean, so on the behavioral side, like it's actually what's pretty cool is the data is all there. Like this is that benefit of us being in a cloud environment, in a cloud world. Like, and for so many of our users, when we think about that behavioral and collaboration data set, that is all being the metadata is all being captured. That is there. And no one's doing anything with it. That's for them to use. There are a lot of privacy implications. We talk to customers about that in their privacy teams. Those are great conversation. I know it sounds strange, but those are great conversations to have because it's like getting customers comfortable with the types of data they have access to and can safely use, even when we think about things like GDPR and other kinds of security requirements. The data is all there. And so it's really a question of them deciding, for which populations they want to go ahead and light that up. And for Copilot, that's something that's all included in ways that make it very easy for them to harvest, process, visualize that data through analysts in a very safe and secure way. So yes, and we have a, kind of a rich workbench to make that happen. We have teams of dedicated engineers to help them set that up. So the whole process is actually pretty quick. And the other exciting thing to me has always been because we're talking about they're working with their own data that lives in their cloud environment. From the moment they kind of light up this capability for users, they're getting over a year's worth of rich historical data, right? So hey, I've been using Copilot for over a year. Like, how have those behaviors been changing? Like, we just introduced something. We're trying something new. What's that before and after look like? You have the ability to look at all that. So it's actually, even though it's a very difficult data set to work with on its own, again, because of some of the solution and tooling that we're putting around that, we make it very easy for customers to kind of light that up and start getting some value out of the box. Now, down the road, they want to start creating their own views, their own dashboards, their own reporting. That'll take a little bit more time. We have partners and resources and a lot of ways to help customers do that. But they can get going pretty quickly in a couple of weeks by starting to better understand what that data set looks like.
Well, finally, and more addressing the human element here, but what ethical considerations arise when an enterprise is explicitly measuring and optimizing based on employee behavior data in your view?
Yeah, no, it's a phenomenal question. And again, it's something that we've been talking to customers about. I've been talking to customers about over the 7 years I've been here. And I mentioned all this data exists there and it is there for all their users. It's something they have access to. However, for the solution I've been talking about, which was really architected with privacy in mind, meant to help firms understand patterns and trends around productivity, engagement, things of that nature. There are a lot of protections that are put in place, which will make users feel secure that they're not being, spied on or surveilled upon, as well as the privacy teams who get involved, kind of start nodding their heads around this idea of like, aggregating the data into groups of at least 5 or more so that people aren't individually identifiable, making sure that, any personal information is being de-identified, making sure that, there's a lot of permissioning and controlling around who's dealing and handling which pieces of the data. Analysts, right, can only do certain things, having partitions. So if I've got certain regions that need to be handled separately or certain subsidiaries or functions, I have support for that, as well as literally not turning it on for certain regions like Germany. I don't want to go there. Fine, don't do it there. Even though we have customers using this in Germany, right? But again, some things like that, even allowing giving customers the ability to have their users either opt in or opt out for these kinds of solutions. So I think, privacy is really, really important. It's something that we've always taken very seriously. We're using this globally in more than 90 countries, more than 200,000 employees. We've had conversations with works councils. We've helped a lot of other companies navigate that, but I would say like privacy, like we need to be talking, and companies need to have their privacy teams very closely involved as they think about the measurement for these kinds of solutions, because the last thing that you want to do is, in your excitement and exuberance around lighting this up in certain areas or trying to drive certain business outcomes, violate some of your privacy principles, right? And so again, those are conversations we've been part of. And I think as once people have a kind of a grounding of how it works, they complete their differential privacy impact assessments, we're good to go. But it's very important for firms to look at this upfront, make sure they're comfortable with it, they know how things work before everyone gets excited and someone slams on the brakes.
Well, Bob, this has been an incredibly deep and practical conversation in quantifying AI's value. Just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you, Target. It's been a real pleasure. You made my Friday afternoon, so thanks.
Awesome. And to all our viewers, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you on the next conversation.